Welcome to Positive Philter with your host, Philip Wilkerson, a podcast that focuses on friends, family, health, and career, with a little self-help along the way. Please join me in this journey for self-improvement, and I hope what I have to share will make you a better person, thus making the world a better place. I hope you enjoy the show. I hope you enjoy the show. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, people. Philip Wilkerson back with another episode of Positive Philter. I'm joined by a special guest. Everyone's a special guest because they take time to join me on my show. And so you know I'm a emerging leader, I like to believe, and I'm learning. And so I've connected with Nick from the LEAD office at George Mason, which I don't know what it stands for. Is it an acronym?
Yep. You know what you say?
Yeah, go ahead.
Leadership, Education, and Development, L.E.A.D.
Well, it's perfect because it actually leadership and then lead. So, hey, wow, they're very clever here at Mason. And so I've connected with Nick. We have a lot of just informal conversations, but a lot of our conversations also talk about us as people, as leaders. And so I wanted to have a dialogue today about ethical leadership, his views on leadership, and just leadership in general. We'll be all over the place, but just his thoughts on it, because I think leadership, I personally believe that everyone could be a leader. That's my personal philosophy. But before we get into the show, Nick, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. So I'm originally from New York, just outside of New York City, a suburb about half hour north of New York City. I'm the director of the LEAD office, Leadership, Education, and Development. Been here at Mason for 12 years now, almost 12 years, just a little under. I studied psychology in undergrad and educational psychology with a counseling focus for my master's and my PhD at University of Texas at Austin. My undergrad was at Hamilton College in upstate New York. I have two kids, a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old, which I think you do also.
Yes.
And then I really like sports, watercolor painting when I have some time, travel, and then my main focus with the leadership stuff is ethics and leadership. I teach an ethics and leadership class.
So, you know, we're both, I didn't know you as the counseling was in your background, and I have obviously a master's in counseling. But as we talk about feelings and empathy, what gravitated your studies in that counseling program more so to the leadership development and that aspect of a person?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'll try to keep it brief because it's sort of like a winding story. But when I was in grad school, I started doing like a practicum, doing counseling at a university counseling center. I thought I'd want to be a therapist. And then I was introduced to a model of counseling which talked about remediation, kind of helping people when the anxiety, depression, that kind of situation, prevention and development. And I found my interests became more aligned with the prevention and developmental aspects. And then I got a graduate assistantship position at University of Texas at Austin, kind of advising student leaders, and my counseling really helped a lot with that. But it was really a focus on sort of going out there and taking some of the same principles, but like proactively kind of putting it into the community, as opposed to sometimes counseling centers do a lot of outreach also, but as opposed to having like the one-on-one and that kind of stuff. I wanted to kind of go out in the community and do stuff more and kind of got into the leadership development aspect through that. So with that, the leadership development, meaning presentations and the different aspects of it, I'm hearing like prevention, and I could see that, like, you know, of not saying anti-anxiety or depression, but like equipping people with skills to have that, but then also development. So what part of the development part was that you gravitated to? Like, was it like strengths, like learning about people's strengths, or was it about, you know, the personalities that contribute to a leader? What part of the development part did you gravitate to? Yeah, I had a couple mentors at University of Texas at Austin, and one of the things was the ethics part, because like, how do we help people to be good people? So I was interested in the leadership part, particularly through the office that I was working in. And the ethics part kind of combined with it, because a lot of times you think of, well, what's the purpose of leadership? Because sometimes there's a lot of different definitions of leadership, and you know, the kind of classic question people get into is like, okay, Hitler, you know, was that a leader or not a leader, or that kind of stuff. So we talk about however you define leadership, we have to be talking about ethics. If it's in your definition, so you kind of assume that someone who's a leader, that they're doing it for positive purposes, then we have to talk about like ethics with part of that. If it's not in your definition, I always say we don't want to be in the business of preparing the next terrible dictators to do all these terrible stuff. Yeah. So no matter what, we have to be talking about, well, what's the purpose of our leadership? Like, lead for why? And it can't just be for selfish reasons. It's got to be thinking about others, people that are different from us. And so what gravitated for me was, I mean, both my parents were philosophy majors, but you don't have to be a philosophy major to ethics is for everybody. But we had conversations about that kind of stuff, and I'm driven, like, just personally, even if this wasn't my job, like, how do we help people to become better people that are making positive contributions in society and making the world a better place? Because ultimately, like, if I think for my kids, what do I want for them? I want them to be well and do good. So the well-being stuff, and also doing good in terms of not just for themselves, but for others.
Be well and do good. I feel like that's a quote from someone. I don't know. I feel like it's a well-being thing, like service to others and all that thing. And so I think, and I love that you said anyone can have ethics infused in their dialogue or discipline, right? Like, I'm in communication. There's an ethics part, right? What is the, as we talk about information and how we share information, there's an ethical standard, but there's basis to that, right? And then all these other things, history, and so you really are counseling. What's the ethics of ethical practices in counseling? So I think there is that discussion everywhere. You did talk about dictators, terrible leaders. I was watching something on Netflix. It was like How to Be a Dictator, and it was a mini series that had like Hitler had a time, Stalin had a time, Gaddafi had it, and they were showing all these things, and Kim Jong-il and all these things, and they were talking about like their leadership style and how they actually ran countries. And so from the outside, when I was watching the documentary, they all ended bad. Everyone did not have a sustainable leadership, but they actually motivated or had people under their lead. So were they good leaders, these dictators? Are they good leaders in a sense of good and effective, or because you were talking about the two school of thoughts. Bring us back to that.
So there's a conflict, as you know, within the leadership field, where does ethics come up in your definition of leadership? So to me, your question is like, okay, good. There's different interpretations of the word good, right? Are we talking morally and ethically good? Or are we talking good in terms of like effective of whatever purpose you're trying to get to? So for me, a lot of definitions of leadership have some kind of aspect of the idea of influence in there. A lot of them even have the word like influence in a group context or that kind of stuff. So some people would say, no, Hitler or Stalin or today Putin, that's not a leader in my definition. Somebody would say this, it's not leader in their definition, that's a dictator or whatever. Other people say, yes, that's a leader, but it's an unethical leader or whatever. So at the LEAD office, we talk about trying to prepare people to be effective ethical leaders. You got to have both. So you can be sometimes an ethical person, but maybe you're not the most effective in sort of making a big impact with what's ethical and stuff. And you could be effective in terms of doing some pretty terrible, horrible things. Yeah. So we got to have both of those things, effective and ethical.
So it's school of thought and leadership development, people by leadership development, but your personal stance, and I kind of, what you gravitated to was that there needs to be a yes and, not or. Like you need to be, having a purpose that leads people and influences people effectively, yes, and with a ethical practice behind it or morality to it.
Right, yeah. I'd even say, because we talk at Mason a lot about we want to help students succeed, right? Well, when we say succeed at what? Like what purpose, what kind of stuff? So are we, like if a student comes into like one of our programs or a class, that kind of stuff, and like, hey, I want to be successful at doing something completely, running my own business that kind of takes advantage of people, harms the environment, this kind of stuff. Okay, are we going to help you succeed at that? No, we want to help you succeed at something that's actually for positive change. So I think it's sometimes people have this assumption, okay, well, succeed, like no matter what your definition is, we're going to help you get to wherever you want to go. And I know it might sound like judgmental, and I feel like a lot of ethics it's really about how should we live our lives. And it's not at all meant to be judgmental or anything, but we got to help people critically look at, it's not just whatever goal anybody wants. It's, how can we try to get you within a broad range of possible goals? So it's pretty broad, but there are some limits to what success really should look like and what is like a reasonable goal. And I know that might sound like we're trying to limit somebody. I think it's a really broad range within that, but there's certain things that cross line. Even thinking now, like some people say change is good, right? And like you have the Taliban back in power in Afghanistan. So is that good change? Like we got to think like women not being able to have education and not being able to work in nonprofits and all that stuff. I think we really got to look at and not just assume, okay, well, whatever it is for good purposes.
So I had a question, right? Let's say you have a budding leader, right? And they're like, yo, I want to be a leader. And through your processes, asking them why they want to be a leader, you start teasing out that it's probably not in good reflection. Do you use that as an opportunity to educate without judge? How do you do that? Like, what if I came up to you, I'm a student, a young person, and I say, I want to be a leader. Mm-hmm. And you tease out that eventually my end goal is to be rich and just get over on people and take over the world, like conquer. Mm-hmm. Would that be like, would you be able to tease that out in our like training and then try to have a positive influence? Or would you like, hey, I don't know if this program or this leadership model that I'm trying to teach you is the best? What would you do with that dilemma right there?
I'd say to me, the more the merrier for like to come in to like participate in some of the educational opportunities we have. And then like you're saying, I think directly saying, hey, that's not a good goal, that kind of stuff, I don't think that really works. I think question asking, that's why the counseling part I think really comes in. And it doesn't necessarily have to be just by me or someone in our office, but just in general, are we like trying our best to kind of listen to people, seeing where they're coming from, and then asking the types of questions like, what would you think if someone else, this is what I do with my kids all the time, if someone else were to treat you that way, if someone else were trying to like take over the world and their business kind of conflicts with yours, what do you think is a good way to kind of sort out that situation, whatever, and help them come to their own conclusions? Not everyone, it's not going to work for everyone because sometimes they're so committed, but how do we help the majority of people are going to be reasonable when they stop to think over time if we're questioning them as opposed to like saying, hey, what you're doing is dumb or not good or whatever.
Yeah, because I was about to say maybe if they're like focused on just being a bad person, they could be like, what would you do if someone treated you this way? And they're like, I'll just take them out kind of thing. Yeah. And you're like, oh, okay, this person's a sociopath. Or, someone that has a baseline of natural empathy will say, that feels bad. And I think, honestly, teasing out those questions, if we go back into those other ethical things, we could tease out that a lot of the people that are those dictators and whatnot probably are sociopaths, or they would not feel that empathy for someone else. They had a mission to do something and conquer. And usually their leadership was not for the good of the people, it was good for the individual. They wanted to be powerful. Yeah. So how can you, in addition though, how can you take someone's ambition and understand that people do have a desire for power, but also frame that in a good way? Like, it's okay to be wanting to be powerful, or it's okay to want to be famous or influential, but how would you, as someone that studied leadership, take someone and help them channel that desire to be famous or powerful, but also good? Yeah,
I think one of the main things, like, I know you know about the Strengths Finder. I don't know if everyone knows about that Clifton Strengths Finder, but basically Gallup will say that those are value neutral, right? Like, what are you using them towards? So there's things like, empathy, which I think most people would say, okay, that's a positive thing. But maybe you could use your empathy to think, how can I manipulate people? I understand their emotions, their feelings. And the similar thing on the flip side for, say, something like significance, like you're somebody who really wants to be significant or whatever. Somebody could think, oh, well, that's just selfish or something. But you could really use that to, like, how can I have a significant difference and, like, make a positive change for people and that kind of stuff. So remind me the question. I'm not sure I'm getting
just saying,
it.
Like, how would you, you're just saying it, right? Yeah. Like, how would you channel that? Whether you said value neutral, and I think you spoke to it. You would channel that value neutral aspect of significance or influence and all that and say, okay, well, it's okay to be famous. It's okay, but are you being famous so that you can help the greater number of people? Right. Or, I'll be honest, like, one of my things someday, I want to stun on people and I want to have a building named after me, right? Yeah. But then I'm like, what for? Well, I want that building to be an educational place, a place that legacy, right? That's really actually really important to me, is legacy and name and all that. Yeah. But at the same time, I don't want that legacy to be attached to something bad, right. So you could channel that for good too. That I guess it's not. I like how you said it's not selfish. It could be a little ego driven, but it also, it could be channeled into a positive thing. So I like that. I never heard of that value neutral. Like, Yeah, I didn't even thought about how you could be empathetic and say, okay, I can live my life in your shoes, and then manipulate you.
Right.
So even a thing that we think is an innately good value could be
Yeah.
twisted both positively and negative.
Yeah.
So I like that.
I think too, like some of the things that will be helpful for people. So some of the stuff we do is around like traditional ethics, which is about questions of like your character, like you being respectful, this kind of stuff, and what's the greatest good for the greatest number of people, those kind of questions, which are kind of like reason-based. But then I think we often look at the context and the environment. So if you don't have a social system or a culture that's kind of reinforcing doing some of the positive things, like an individual can kind of reason through all this stuff, but like, you know, their boss is putting pressure on them to do this, or they feel like, well, this is not something I do at home, but this is my job, so I'm going to just carry this out because, you know, this is what I'm supposed to do, whatever. So I think partly we've been talking about like individual leaders and that kind of stuff, but if we're not also taking into account the context and the pressures and social factors or whatever, but then also followers, because I know you and I have talked about this a little bit before, but like there's this whole field about followership where sometimes there's so much focus on, okay, the individual leader or that kind of stuff, and sometimes it's too much focus on position of power or whatever, but how are other people, like if you have some of these terrible dictators or even just somebody in your own life who you think is a terrible leader, if they don't have other people supporting them and like kissing up to them and doing this kind of stuff, they're not going to have as much power, right? So we have to educate. It's kind of multiple sides. It's not just the people seen as leaders, but it's also followers in the context.
Yeah, I think one of the scariest thing about those aspects though is that if the followership is inundated or indoctrinated by a bad leader, and then you are the opposite of that general culture, then you stand out and leave yourself to harm, or like, you know, like you protest that dictator, you sometimes might be by yourself or not with a large group. So I think there is that part of the education, because you're like, a lot of the times when we think about these horrible things and events in history, we're like, how did a mass of people just go along with it as normal everyday people? They weren't they weren't inherently evil, but they followed this blindly, and then those that spoke up. So I think there should be some focus on the followership as well, because you're right, if you take out the followers underneath the leader, they have no one to lead.
Right.
That's kind of interesting.
Yeah, and I've done in the past a study abroad program with students focused on the Holocaust. And the main focus is that we don't really focus on Hitler. We focus on all, like what you just said, the everyday people. How do they do these things? And one of the big things is like rationalizations. You convince yourself like, okay, well, this is, you know, other people have done worse than me, or this is just part of my job, or things that you say to yourself to justify stuff. And I think you hit on another really important thing, which is so many people have the assumption like good people do good things and bad people do bad things. But usually I ask, you know, anyone listening, like, do you know somebody who you think is a good person generally who's done a bad thing? And like, why do they do it? And if you think of yourself as a good person, have you done a bad thing? And why do you think? So it's not as simplistic as, okay, you know, we don't need to look at ethics because I'm a good person. Like, no, it's a lot more complicated than that.
It's a spectrum. It's a things. And you're right. There's like people that, you know, probably did terrible things and went home and were great parents. I'm like, that's crazy, right? Yeah. Like they did terrible things at their job, compartmentalize that, and go home and they're actually loving parents. And then, and you see all these documents like, I never knew this person that kissed me on the head and tucked me in at night and read me a book was doing terrible things out in the world, because that's not the person I saw at home. They can compartmentalize that. So who were some of your influences in leadership development and leadership education, and people that you listened to or read or that inspired you to kind of?
I'd say number one, it starts with my mom, honestly, because I feel like my mom, she never rose to a high position, that kind of stuff, whatever, but she is really good at like questioning, listening, kind of the idea of nudging people towards something, not in a manipulative way, but trying to help people really see. So I know that might seem different than like a famous person or something like that, but I think it really started with that, and that's something we sometimes do with students too, is like thinking like, you know, what are your influences and where does some of this stuff come from? I know like there's a lot of stuff, there's a couple people out of University of Texas at Austin who are doing something around the idea of behavioral ethics, which is not the traditional like philosophy of like, okay, how do you think through what the right thing to do is? But a lot of the stuff we were talking about situational factors, biases, that kind of stuff. They have a whole website called Ethics Unwrapped, and I really like a lot of their work, and because it's really kind of helping people see some of these day-to-day factors that influence us. Trying to think, there's someone named Craig Johnson who wrote the textbook that I use in my ethics and leadership class called Meeting the Ethical Challenges of Leadership, which I like a lot of the stuff he's kind of compiled in there. But yeah, those are some. But in terms of like ethical influence, some of the people that I personally know, because I've seen, sometimes people can kind of be out there and you don't necessarily know what's underlying them.
Yeah, that's crazy. I thought about that. So, what is your leadership? You did the quiz. What do you believe is your leadership style?
Oh, in terms of ethical leadership, or just in general?
I think was that one that you said Take 5? Was that specific?
Take 5. That was around ethical decision making.
Okay, was that a particularly one? Okay, so that wasn't like a strengths leadership. That was particularly about the ethical leadership.
Right.
Yeah. Which one are you? I never asked.
So because I created that quiz.
Okay.
It's take5.gmu.edu.
I'm gonna put it in the show notes for those that could take it. It was pretty interesting.
Yeah. So it's since I created it, I feel like I'm biased with it because ideally I want to kind of balance multiple of them. But I'd probably say the character approach, like what kind of person I'm trying to be, like respectful, honest, compassionate, those type of things, and the kind of the golden or platinum rule. So the golden rule is like do unto others as you'd have them do unto you, but then the platinum is like as they'd have you do unto them. So basically it's sort of like really stepping into their shoes and
more
seeing
empathetic,
like that. So I thought those are a couple ones, but I feel like they're also important because like for those of you who are able to take it, the wolf one, the blue, which is the consequences approach, like what is the actual result of what you're doing, regardless of what your intent is. Sometimes we do things with good intent and it has terrible results. So we have to consider that. So I think ideally it's really trying to help people see different ways. But do you remember what came out of that?
I was an otter.
Otter, okay, so that's the character.
The character one. And I was like, okay, and I read it and I was like character driven, and I liked the story where it was like if you saw someone picking up on someone, like it doesn't matter the number, the mass, and like you're really gonna help the person that's like your friend and connected to your character. And so I'm like a very personal person.
Yeah.
I think I'm emotionally driven. Was it the feeling is big for me. Like sometimes I might need that complimentary relationship with I need my logic person, but I'm very passionate, and when I'm passionate about something or that too, and I definitely think about character, and I think that's why I gravitated to this. So I was like, okay, I aligned a lot with what you said. Like, yes, I could see people that are famous and people that do big things, but like, if they're doing it for these manipulative reasons, I don't think they're good leaders. And I think now that we're having this discussion, I'm a yes and. Like, it needs to be both for me too. Like, I'm not gonna follow someone they could be the best public speaker, they could be the best with money, they could do all these things, but if I see like they're not a good person or they treat people wrong, I don't feel like I'm motivated by them. I'm not inspired by them. I don't want to blindly follow them. Like that won't be something I gravitated to. So I like the people that are both. Like, wow, they're on it, they're sharp, they're polished, they're organized, all those things. They have those good skills, but also at the same time when I talk to them, they're like, I just want other people to be better, or I want to, the leaders develop other leaders. That's who I gravitate to. And I've gotten that teased out through just normal work experience, like who's actually influenced me and who hasn't. And I've learned over time, it wasn't the most outspoken director or supervisor that helped me grow. It was the one that was actually like just a straight good person. And they pulled something out of me and they pulled things out of other people because they're good. I think that's my leadership style. That's what's influences me.
Definitely.
Character driven, honesty and stuff. Learned that from my dad, military and all that too. So I think we're hitting a pretty good mark. I don't know. I think of any things that I left unsaid. Anything that you think I should share with the listeners about ethical leadership?
Yeah, I think couple of we hit on it a bunch, but a couple of the main things is sort of the myths. I think there's a lot of myths around. So ethics, sometimes people think, okay, that's a bunch of rules telling me what I can't do. To me, not at all. It's like, this is about how we should live our lives and how we can feel good about what we're doing. And sometimes we need to sacrifice, because when I said the be well and do good, sometimes we need to sacrifice our own well-being to make something good. You think of somebody in the military who's fighting for a just cause or whatever, and they give their life or severely injured or that kind of stuff, they're hurting, potentially their own well-being for the well-being of others, or something that they think is better for society. So I think that's something important. I think a lot of times people's assumption, like good people do good things, bad people do bad things. That's not true. That people say, okay, ethics, that's just for the philosophers, but like we're making ethical decisions every day. Like, should I throw this in recycling or not? Or there's a whole lot of everyday decisions. So it's really something for everybody. Just like when you said earlier, like the whole idea about leadership. Our office talks about like everyone has the potential to be a leader. It's not just for the people with the position of power and that kind of stuff. And then around the ethics stuff, it's not just about how you logically reason through. Like what you talked about, the emotion is really important actually in ethics. It's not just like this kind of cold calculating stuff, but then also even somebody who can reason really well and kind of care about somebody emotionally, are they really kind of understanding that they might do something because of the social pressure, the situational factor, like hidden implicit biases that they have, this kind of stuff. So it's pretty complex, but it's something we all need to wrestle with, because if ultimately for me, I feel like my life has been successful if the world is at least a little bit better because I existed. And if we're all trying to do that, we'll keep growing as a society or whatever. And I think we gotta know sometimes when we might be sort of influenced by things that we're not even completely conscious of. So it's just like a constant learning and growing. We call it ethical fitness. We need ethical fitness. It's not just, okay, I'm ethical and that's it.
I like that too, because I think probably the people that we look up to that are good leaders are always questioning and always examining themselves and question their decisions. And if you read their books, they always analyze their decisions they made in the past. Like, I don't know if I would have made the same. They process oriented. They never felt like they just made it and they did the best job. They still analyze themselves, right? Yeah. They still say, I don't know if I would have done it the same way, or I would have done this, or or they might even say, yeah, I'm glad I made that decision. But they're always processing. I think it's a journey. It's not a destination.
Yeah, keep improving.
That's great. All right, so how the show goes. I think you listened to a few. It's a shot for shot segment where you get to ask me any random question. I get to ask you any random question. You want to go first? I go first.
I'll go first.
Okay.
Is you're okay with a family question?
100%.
So, because I know since we both have 7-year-old and 4-year-old each, and you got Bennett and Miles, and I have Emmett and Milo. How'd y'all pick the names? I've just been curious of that, and I figured I'd ask you.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Family name.
So yeah. So it actually is family name. So Bennett is a maiden name, I think, of Jones family, the Bennetts. So Bennett is there. Then Bennett Taylor. Oh yeah, Taylor is the maiden name of my mom. So we got both moms in there.
Okay, nice.
Both sides, my mother-in-law and my mom. So Bennett Taylor, and then obviously Wilkerson. Miles is just because I like the name, like Miles Davis.
Yeah.
I thought it was cool, and I like the I spelling rather than the Y. So that was just that. Like, I love that name. It spoke to us. We heard it, and it was like, wow, Miles. And then Jeffrey is actually named after Jeff, my father-in-law. He was Miles Jeffrey Wilkerson. So we just we honored him with that name, because he did say, he was like, hey, man, I got 2 daughters. How is my name gonna live? There's no curse, right? So we're like, yeah, we got you.
Yeah. Your
name is in the middle name, so Jeffrey could live on in that name, Miles Jeffrey. And then my dad was kind of salty because he was like, oh, you really didn't think about, I'm Philip Linwood Wilkerson III. And he was like, how come you didn't want to do the 4th? I was like, Dad, your name lives on through the Wilkersons, so you already 2 times, 2 chances, to keep the name going. So I feel like that way, all those ways, I think everyone gets a little bit of their name to continue, right? My mother-in-law, my mom, my dad, and Jeff.
Awesome.
All four of them.
Cover all your bases.
Cover all of them. They got some aspect of their name that lives on.
Nice.
So there it is. It makes me sound like I'm a lot smarter. The Miles one, though, was totally random. I just thought Miles sounded cool, sounded smooth.
Yeah,
Miles Davis. That's what I was inspired by. All right. I don't want to ask you the same thing about names. So how'd you go all the way from New York to Texas for college? And while you were there at Texas, what was some of the biggest differences between New York, where you lived, and Texas?
Okay, so good question. So I did my undergrad in upstate New York, and then went to grad school at University of Texas at Austin. And so I had applied for a bunch of different graduate programs, both masters and PhDs. Turned out, just fortunately, that University of Texas Austin was the only PhD program that accepted me, and also my first choice, because I kind of had a philosophical focus, which I kind of liked, kind of sort of from my background and everything. So I remember clearly 3 things stood out to me when I moved to Texas. One was the Texas Pride. There was a lot of state pride, a lot more than I remember from being in New York. A lot of people they're really proud to be Texans. And this was in the 90s, in the mid 90s. And the second one was a number of pickup trucks. It's even in Austin or whatever, city and pretty progressive and stuff, but there are a lot of pickup trucks and that kind of stuff, which I wasn't used to. And the third one was the number of billboards for gentlemen's clubs. I did not grow up with any billboards around advertising gentlemen's clubs and that kind of stuff. But I remember those three things really stood out. And of course the heat. I mean, my undergrad upstate New York was pretty cold and snow, and Texas is definitely a lot hotter.
Well, I went to Texas a couple times, for
Oh yeah, we got the Austin.
Yeah, the Skins, Cowboys game or Commanders, whatever now. So I've been there. I noticed a lot too. One other observation is a lot of guns in Texas.
Yeah.
I saw a lot of guns just around, more guns than I ever thought, in the truck too. That's one thing. Yeah, I was like, oh man, there's a lot of guns, and also that football is it.
Oh yeah. Football
you can just get off the plane and tell. I got off the plane, and even in the Uber, the guy was listening to high school, not college, high school football on the radio.
Yeah.
Because high school football,
is huge,
when I was in Dallas, he was listening. High school football is on the level of small colleges around here, and it's no joke. I don't know how they're gonna. If someone was today, I don't think we want to play football no more. It's not safe. Yeah. Texas would be we don't care. You're still playing football. I think the whole state would be all right, whatever. We're still gonna play illegally or something. They love their football and guns, and I did notice the billboards too. But that's crazy. Yeah. All right. Well, this has been great. I think this has been a great episode. I learned a lot. As you can see, I took notes, and I'm going to be really processing my otter, my otter and my value neutrality and being more organized. So this part of the show is called Shout Outs and Plugs. So this is your opportunity to show love to anyone you want to show love to. Give them a shout out. And then plugs, these are things I'm going to particularly put in the show notes along with the quiz. I want to make sure that those that listen, if they want to take an opportunity to take the quiz, do that. But shout outs and plugs.
Sure. Shout out, I'd say, because when I talked about an example of my mom, I'll give a shout out to my mom because I think she's the foundation of sort of who I've become and that kind of stuff, and just sort of my family. My dad passed away this past year, and I've got two brothers, so just kind of with that family connection. And also shout out to the other folks in the LEAD office, because we got Lisa Snyder and Phil Ripa, and we've been working together for. I'm the newest full-time staff member in our office, and I've been here almost 12 years. So we're a great team, work together really well. And so those are some of the shout-outs. And then plugs, I'd say we have a Diversity Leadership Summit coming. It's a collaboration between the LEAD office and CCEE, which is the Center for Culture, Equity, and Empowerment. And we're doing a Diversity Leadership Summit on March 4th. And then for those of you who are interested in some of the ethics stuff, you go, we mentioned it earlier, but take5.gmu.edu. There's a free quiz you can take on there if you kind of want to explore. And if anyone reaches out, you can share my email address and stuff. This is something I'm passionate about. It's not just something I feel okay, this is part of my job, I'll do this. But so I was really, glad that you asked me to do this podcast, because it's something I feel how can I, help. This is one way I feel I can help the world become a better place.
Excellent. Well, I think you're doing that great job, and definitely shout out to all the people in the LEAD office. I took advantage. I remember one time I felt so honored y'all let me become an alumni speaker, and I was like, oh snap, I made it. I'm an alumni speaker. And then I looked at all the other alumni speakers on that website that you brought back, and you brought such tremendous, amazing Mason alumni come back and share their experiences as leaders. And I was like, wow, just to be in that category with them made me feel honored. So thank you so much.
We'll have you for any of our programs.
Well, I'm
They're
down
awesome.
Again. Yeah, so I thought it was awesome. And, it's just crazy because there's such amazing leaders that have gone on because of your program. You have a little mini cohort to keep in touch with those students, and where they go up and where they end up in life is just phenomenal. So I think, I do totally believe in the philosophy that everyone could be a leader, and taking their experiences from college and going to all kinds of different industries and doing their little aspect of the world, whether it's going to the medicine and all that. You can see that in that alumni list. So it's a great thing, great service you're doing. So Positive Philter listeners, it's been a great episode. Thank you so much for listening. Please follow along and connect with Nick or the LEAD office, or take the quiz if you're Mason affiliated, that you have the ability to take the quiz. I think it'd be fun. It's a good exercise. Please share this episode with your family member and friends. If you have an opportunity, please share the link with your network, as well as please consider contributing to the Jeff Kirsch Anti-Hunger Fund. As you know, my father-in-law passed away, and every episode is dedicated to him in his honor. And the way to do that is I have put his fund in the show notes for those to be interested in donate, because I think what he was doing for the world is great, and I want him to be honored via this podcast. So thank you so much for listening, and take care. Thank you for listening to Positive Philter, a podcast that focuses on family, friends, career, with a little self-help along the way. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your family and friends, and like the Facebook page, Spreading Positivity of Movement. Thanks for listening.